大家好，我们下面进入第六节。迈克尔·哈德森教授在第六节给的题目呢是银行金融资本成为经济租金的主要占有者。那这一段呢，就是这个第六节呢，他所讲的内容和前面几节所讲的内容高度相关。就是当美国从发展实体经济成为二战之后的实体产业第一大国的同时，也因为战争，就是第二次大战，导致呢世界各国为了从美国这个世界最大的军火生产国得到战争物资，那就当然像它你各国的战争状态下，各国的这个货币都不值钱嘛，纸币就贬值嘛，那只能使用黄金。那于是乎美国呢就借二战，就第二次世界大战发了战争财，收储了世界上60%的黄金。那美元也因此就变成了以1944年的布雷顿森林体系所提出的一个基本的这么一个制度，就是美元可以随时兑换，按固定比例兑换黄金，因为它拥有世界最大的黄金储备啊。当然它的纸币就被当成黄金一样的等值，所以叫美金，对吧？不叫美元，叫美金。比如一些中国人不是长期在民国时期一直到就把它叫做美金嘛，因此它就可以用美金在世界范围内当黄金使用。那当然它是美国印出来的钞票了，那就意味着这里边它就有了一个潜在的金融租就资金租在这里边。它并不是生产过程中间产生的收益，而是凭着美国在二战之后所形成的军事霸权支撑它的资金体系，就是货币体系、金融体系，它就能够稳定的获得世界各国拼命生产，来获得它这个资金，获得美元，而向它交纳的其实叫做托宾税。这就意味着它占有超额经济收益的一个特殊的地位，这是靠着美金来支撑的。这一点呢，大家都知道哈。当然，美军支撑的美金还得有美国的制度体系来维，所以我们叫三美了：美军、美金、美制，再加上什么呢？美国的话语，那就是美国的软实力，让大家都相信这是天经地义应该的。比如说叫四美这个四美，美军支撑的美金，维护的美国制度，形成的美国话语，这四美构成了美国长期获取金融租的基本条件。所以呢，在这里边呢，迈克尔·哈德森用西方的政治经济学的理论，对于这个金融资本取代土地贵族成为经济租金的主要收取者，做了一系列的分析。所以他这个分析呢，应该说对于这个西方的制度演变来说呢，有相当深刻的这个意义。但是从我们这些年，我们相见大团队的各种各样的研究力量结合了国际的形势的变化所形成的这个分析框架呢，应该说还是有一定的可以结合起来来相得益彰的这么一个情况。所以我希望呢，各位在学习迈克尔·哈德森这个6节的这个讲座的课程的同时，也要注意参考一下我们这些年，特别是关于第10次危机我们有一本书原来呢叫做8次危机，现在呢叫做10次危机。大家要适当的结合一点我们这个科研团队所形成的研究成果，这样呢便于我们理解西方的租的这个演化过程，理解呢租是怎样在所谓西方的向资本主义工业化进步的过程中间的这个作用它的作用是怎样的？那它怎样和政治制度相关？怎样和革命相关？然后怎样在近代变成了一个金融租，就从一般的地租变成了就所谓资源租变成金融租。金融租如何在所谓金融资本全球化的过程中形成了金融租的世界范围内的获取？那这些呢又是和美国的军事霸权支撑了美国的金融霸权，然后维护了美国的制度霸权 然后带动的是美国的话语霸权。这4个霸权结合在一起，才有金融租长期剥夺世界的基本的条件。好，我就给大家的解释就到这儿啊，谢谢。
So now, if you look at the national income statistics in the United States, the national income statistics count the rising housing rent. That's part of GDP. What the landlords earn is part of GDP. Interest is part of GDP. It's called providing a financial service. And when the landlord charge more, providing a landlord service, the value of landlords goes up. Even if you're a homeowner and you don't have to pay more money to the banker or to the landlord, and your price is going up, about 8% of America's GDP is what homeowners would have to pay themselves if they were rented the apartment to themselves. So that somehow you built into the GDP this whole economic fat, this whole unnecessary rentier overhead that classical economists wanted to get rid of, and that China, after its revolution, had the advantage of not having to suffer. That's why it had a revolution. You wanted to get rid of all of this unnecessary income. So the early by 20th century saw bankings play a very different role from what it played in Ricardo's day. In Ricardo's day, it opposed the landlords, but now that banks have their major market in real estate lending, banks are in back of the landlord class. They're backing it. They're supporting the landlord class so that they can have a common interest. And that's what volume 2 and 3 of Capital was all about, and the theories of surplus value. Rent theory should have become the basis of free market reform, and it was for some reason, for some time in America. Take a factor of production creates value and with a cost. Labor is a factor of production because it costs money to support the labor while he works. Capital is a factor of production, the physical capital, because it has a labor content. All of this was discussed in the 19th century. But the radio spectrum is like land. The airwaves are simply there. They're provided by nature, like air. So rent-seeking opportunities can be created by levying an access charge or licensing fee, because production and broadcasting cannot take place without the airwaves. So they're not man-made. They don't require any cost. So they're not a factor creating value. They're not a factor producing value. They are an opportunity to create economic rent. And that subtlety was the core of classical economics, and it's not taught in today's textbooks. And that's why today's textbooks don't explain why America's getting poor and China's getting rich. Economic rent is cost-free. It's unearned, just like minerals are in the land, but they can be grabbed by miners saying, this is mine. The richest lady in Australia is the daughter of a prospector who found a big iron mine in Australia. And should this iron mine, should all that iron wealth be owned by Australia so that it doesn't have to tax people? Or should it be owned to the fact that, well, my father found the mine and I'm getting it all and I'm going to be the richest person? Well, Australians say the government shouldn't get it. We should leave all the natural resources into whoever finds them. And we're willing to make ourselves poor. We're willing to become, have our living standards lower and lower because we believe in free enterprise, that whoever grabs the land first should have it. And that's the distinction in philosophy between Australia, which is it's a feudal country, and socialist countries like China. Land rent is a payment for the privilege. Australia believes that the rich should have privilege, and if the poor are poor, their destiny is to become poor. And of course, they should be poor. They should die off with that. With that philosophy, they will become poor. The population will grow off, die off. And if you want to look at what Australia will look like in 10 years, look at Greece. I expect a lot of Australians to have to move there. I don't know where else they can move, maybe to New Zealand. But that's Australia is what China doesn't want to end up looking like. And I understand that Chinese send a lot of students to Australia to study economics. They won't learn economics in the classroom. They'll look economics from looking around them and say, this is what a crazy country looks like. So look at the country around you if you go there. Just ignore what you're taught because it's junk economics, quite frankly. So I'm going to summarize. The US and European economies have this self-destructive belief that providing more and more bank credit to bid up housing prices makes the economy richer. Now, much of the net worth of the middle class is in the housing, but right now the middle class is shrinking, home ownership is shrinking, and you're about to have 10 to 20 million evictions in the United States and defaults on mortgages because of the coronavirus. So you're going to have a vast concentration in absentee rental ownership by companies foreclosing and on mortgages that haven't been paid because the homeowners or the renters haven't been able to work during the pandemic. Other countries are paying, Germany, I think, is paying workers 80 or 90% of the wage so they can get by during the pandemic. But America says, well, you know, it's a free market, meaning you're as free to sleep under a bridge as anybody else, as Anatole France put it. The question is, what America has a different idea of freedom than countries like China with another economic freedom idea. So the major factor raising housing prices, as I said, has been bank credit, and a property's worth whatever banks will lend, and banks will lend as much as the government will lend the banks to or insure bank mortgages to make them lend even more. But I think it's economically self-destructive for society to try to get rich by buying housing whose market prices is constantly bid up by debt. The effect is to raise the cost of living and doing business. So America believes the way to get rich is to raise the cost of living, raise the break-even wage, raise the cost of having to hire labor. And that's what Ricardo warned would bring industrial capitalism to an end. And it's indeed what's bringing American finance capitalism to an end. So financializing real estate is occurred at the expense of the tax collector. Whatever rental income is paid to the tax collector leaves less available to be paid to the bankers of interest. So the banks and the landlord class that are the main political campaign contributors make sure that they back candidates that are going to tax labor and industry, not finance and land ownership and real estate. So that the best way you can explain the political divisions in the United States now. There was a whole fight over whether rent should end up being paid interest or not, and a whole critique of landlords in the United States that was quickly picked up in Russia and China. Sun Yat-sen emphasized land taxation as equalizing land rights for the Chinese. And he wrote, quote, the teaching of Henry George, an American popular journalist, will be the basis for our program of reform. The land tax is the only means of supporting the government, is an infinitely just, reasonable, and equitably distributed tax, and on it we will found our new system. The centuries of heavy and irregular taxation for the benefit of the Manchus have shown China the injustice of any other system of taxation. So Dr. Sun's aim was to prevent a landlord class from continuing to dominate Chinese development. I don't think he thought that owner-owned houses that had to have a high cost would be much of a solution. His three principles of the people were that railroads, public utilities, canals, and forests should be nationalized, and all income from the land and mines should be in the hands of the state. With this money in hand, the state can therefore finance the social welfare programs. Well, I think that was the most progressive attitude at that time. And in Shandong province, the city of Guangdao, was taken over by Germans. And the German colonial administrator and land reformer, Wilhelm Schrammer, adopted a 6% land tax when they seized the city after 1897. Dr. Sun visited the city in 1912 and called its land tax a model for China's future. Well, as I mentioned earlier, Hong Kong is the best-known Chinese city, financing its public budget by taxing the land, at least in the sense that it has based its civic revenue on a land tax. But it has not collected all the land rent by any means, and that's why there are so many real estate billionaires in Hong Kong. Its policy falls short of 19th century and land reformers urge. So just because you finance your city's spending out of the land rent entirely doesn't mean that you're collecting all of the land rent. That's the distinction that has to be noted. So today, China's become the workshop of the world, like England wanted to be, largely by avoiding the rentier class that was responsible for raising the cost of living and doing business, and responsible for deindustrializing the US and other Western economies. The government is nominal owner of the land, but the question is, how much is the government going to tax the value of the land to keep it from enriching housing prices and absentee landlords who are renting it out, enriching bankers, not because of population growth and not because of rising prosperity, but simply because of easier credit. You want to prevent land rent being paid to the banks and to use it instead as your own domestic source of income. So throughout the world today, banks are replacing landlords as the ultimate recipient of land rent. That's what makes today's world different from that emerged from feudalism and that of the 19th century. And this debt-financed rise in the cost of living increases the cost of labor, and that's the American disease. Now, I'll leave it for the next lecture, dealing with financialization, to explain how this financialization has occurred throughout the whole economy, not only absorbing real estate, but how industry itself has been financialized and drained and deindustrialized by being financialized. Ricardo depicted the banks as the friends of industry by promoting free trade so that it could compete in foreign markets. But today, banks have become the opposite of the supporters of industry. They help deindustrialization because deindustrialization enables gentrification of the land and real estate wealth and rentier wealth. Ricardo did not acknowledge any role at all that was played by finance in raising the cost of production, because he was the bank lobbyist. He was the parliamentary spokesman for the banking class. He was a bond broker. And suggestions to tax away the land rent today are unlikely to work, because it would immediately, if you were to tax the land rent suddenly today, all the banks would go under. Well, that actually would not be a very bad thing. In China, all of a sudden, you were to tax the residential land, then the Chinese homeowners would say, wait, I can't pay the tax and pay the bank. So the government would say, tell you what, okay, declare bankruptcy, wipe out the debt to the bank. We will then sell you back the house, for whatever it was worth before without the land. And we're just going to get the money that you used to pay the bank, you'll now pay the government as a land tax. Well, in America, the government is not the banks. And so the banks would fight this. The government would have to let the banks go under and replace it with public banks. You would have to make banking a public utility. That is ultimately China's great advantage over the West. China has done what the ancient Near East did. China has kept finance as a public utility, not as an opportunity for just exploiting the economy and turning the population into debt peons who have to work for a lower and lower wage and pay everything above subsistence to the banker. China's been able to avoid this The West has not avoided it, and it's China's ability to avoid financialization that has enabled it to follow the enormous increase in wealth and prosperity that you've had for the last few decades. The question is how to keep it that way and how to prevent catching the American disease of financialization that I'll go into in more detail in next week's lecture.